Now that I've finished my summaries for the first two stories in the Bobbiedots conclusion, it's time to now do a summary on the titular story, Bobbiedots Part 2. This is a sequel to the third story in Submechanophobia, similarly titled Bobbiedots Part 1, but now it's time for the conclusion on the Bobbiedots story. Keep in mind that I'll be doing a summary video on the epilogue for this book as well, so stay tuned for that as well, and without further ado, let's get to talking about the Bobbiedots conclusion. This story picks up right from where it finished off at the end of part 1. We get a bit of a recap and we actually begin with Abe getting ready for work. He wasn't very trusting of the Gen 2 Bobbiedots. They told him that the weird things happening in the apartment were because of the Gen 1 Bobbiedots that were still active and trying to help, but Abe 1 didn't quite trust them. He always just tried his best to stay on their good side just in case he was right about them. He liked to quiet in the mornings, but the Bobbiedots were playing music, but because he didn't want to get on their bad side, he didn't say anything. Rose did notice, however, that Abe was acting a bit strange, but he told her that it was just work stuff. He also found that Olive had activated the bedroom door lock for safety. He had to get going as soon as possible. He had a plan. He needed to find out if the Gen 1 Bobbiedots actually did exist, or if they were just something the Bobbiedots had made up. He looked through the Fazbear Entertainment databases, finding references to the holographic Bobbiedots, but none to the supposed Gen 1s. But then he realized that Fazbear Entertainment didn't keep records or failed animatronics. The dysfunctional animatronics were kept underground in storage in the Pizzaplex. Abe thought maybe he could find one down in storage, so he went down. He didn't quite like being underground and felt a little claustrophobic. There were still people working down there, but Abe didn't know any personally, but he had to go down another level from here, down into the disgusting sewer, not cleaned and still with wandering wasted animatronics, including a scrapped Glamrock Chica up against a wall. He wandered around dodging moving endoskeletons, trying to find a Gen 1. If he found one, he'd know what he was up against, but if he didn't, that wouldn't really prove the Bobbiedots were lying either, as he wouldn't be able to explore this whole area. It was pretty huge. Abe had no reason to believe that the animatronics wandering around would hurt him, but he didn't know for sure and still dodged the animatronics as best as he could, just to be safe. He searched for hours and recognized every animatronic he came across, finding none of them to be Gen 1 Bobbiedots. However, he did manage to find a scrapped and broken Mr. Hippo animatronic. Mr. Hippo was his favorite animatronic, a fact I completely understand, though disagree with slightly, but he also found a Mr. Hippo magnet. These were able to short out electronics, and Abe thought maybe he could use it to disable the locks in his apartment and find out what the Bobbiedots were doing at night. He put the magnet in his pocket and headed home. Abe got home later than usual, and the Bobbiedots were suspicious of this. Before going to bed, he noticed the Bobbiedots were frowning at him, and when he said goodnight, they didn't reply and disappeared without responding. A few minutes after the Bobbiedots disappeared, Abe rolled over and set an alarm for 2 a.m., the Mr. Hippo magnet under his pillow ready for him to awaken. When he did, he shorted out the locks on his bedroom door and went out into his dark apartment. As he reached the coffee table, he began hearing the sounds he'd heard on the nights before, a distinct sound of sudden movement, and it was very close to him. He ducked behind something, attempting to hide when he saw the trapdoor in his ceiling slowly starting to open. He sat for a few minutes before peeking, only to see long black cables slithering down from the trapdoor and following him as if they had a mind of their own as he stumbled through the apartment. They were almost like tentacles, but they were really just cables. He was able to dodge the cables and duck behind the couch. He now knew for sure that the Gen 1 Bobbiedots were real. He was sure there was something in his apartment trying to kill him, and he wanted to access the main terminal in his apartment. He gazed over at it only to find that it had been occupied by what was clearly the predecessor to Rose, or 3 as her original name was, sharing her familiar pink coloring but dragging wires behind it as well as being very damaged. The colors of her were a lot more subtle. There were a lot of expository parts to her endoskeleton, like a missing eye and a gap in her torso, and her pigtails were made purely of black wires. 3 turned and began walking directly toward Abe, but she didn't seem to be able to see him. She switched directions and began feeling around a wall, confirming that she couldn't see. Abe exhaled in relief, but he did so too loudly, and 3 instantly turned back around and began charging at Abe, prompting a scream and him running back to his bedroom, slamming the door shut. He waited for a bit until he heard the trapdoor closing. He was relatively safe. He now knew the Bobbiedots weren't lying and that the Gen 1s were in fact the true enemies. He still went out on other nights, however. One night he saw Gemini's counterpart, 1, who is described in the story pretty much exactly accurately to how we see her in the cover. Abe finds that 1 is also blind and wonders whether or not 2 would be blind as well. 1's voice box was also emitting some soft but also unnerving hissing and gurgling sounds. Abe wasn't usually scared of animatronics, damaged or otherwise, so he wondered why he was so scared of the Gen 1s. He thought it was because of the cables. One then walks towards the kitchen and becomes Shattered Roxy or Ballora or a clicker as Abe follows her and accidentally makes a small noise, a quiet noise but enough to get One's attention. She walked towards him and got so close that Abe had to hold his breath. Eventually he had to take a breath and he did so as quietly as possible, but it wasn't quiet enough and One lunged at him. Thankfully he was able to dodge her and she didn't seem to hear him. He tried to get back to his bedroom, but as One searched for him he accidentally brushed against the couch, once again getting One's attention, to which she blocked the way to his bedroom. As quietly as possible, Abe moved over to his office, closing the door behind him, which also got the attention of One. As he heard her cables be dragged in his direction, he hid under the desk in the room. After a few minutes there were no more sounds. Thinking he was safe, he exited the office and saw that the cables were still dangling from the ceiling, meaning One was still down here. He began walking back towards the bedroom and almost walked directly into One, prompting him to gasp, which One heard, and she opened her mouth and screamed. Abe tried to get away, but One grabbed his ankle, knocking him to the floor. Cables flung at him, hitting him all over. Eventually he was able to stand up, but he found that 2 was also down here. 2 was completely stripped of her shell and was just an endoskeleton with a missing eye and both legs missing. She crawled around the apartment but did so very quickly and was able to grab Abe's ankle again. Abe was getting cut and his bones seemed to be getting crushed, but his adrenaline kicked in and he kicked 2 in the face, got up and ran, only to be once again face to face with One. He paused and 2 grabbed his thigh. One was reaching toward his face. Abe was sure he would die, but the TV suddenly turned on, distracting the Gen 1s, causing them to try to cover their ears, and then One jumped to the TV and utterly destroyed it. Abe took this as an opportunity to move. The Bobbiedots appeared on the monitors and Abe told them to put on music. They did, and Abe rushed back to his room, shutting the door. The music turned off and the Gen 1s retreated back to the trap door. Abe was cut all over his body. He knew he should go to the hospital, but how could he explain his wounds? He was still living in this apartment when he shouldn't have been, and he could lose his job. He had to wrap up his wounds himself, which was very painful, but he managed. The next day, people kept asking him why he looked like a mummy, and of course he lied. He had to do his work, of course, and after fixing up the golf course in Monty Golf and a funny interaction with a little girl, Abe heads to Rockstar Row where he meets a girl named Sasha. Sasha thinks that the animatronics are a little full of themselves, and Abe asks if that's a bad thing. Sasha doesn't really know the answer, and that's what she's here to figure out. Abe enjoyed being around Sasha. Talking to her seemed to push the rest of the world away, and even his pain was slightly lowered. She didn't comment on the gauze or the bandages either. Sasha is a social worker who works with troubled kids, and she's here to figure out whether or not it's a good idea to bring kids with issues to the Pizzaplex. Abe told her that if he was a dad, he would bring his kids to the Pizzaplex, but not unsupervised, and wouldn't let them stay near the animatronics for too long. Sasha and Abe played some arcade games and pinball for the next 20 minutes, before Abe asked her to have dinner with him at a Chinese restaurant called the Golden Garden that night. She said yes. This is why we all have to aspire to be like Abe. This man has such a high quantity of riz that he got a date even when he looked like a mummy. So on the date, they talk a lot about Freddy's and stuff, and Abe accidentally brings up Olive. Sasha asks who Olive is, but Abe dodges the question. Sasha lets it slide until she gets a fortune cookie that says, good relationships are poisoned by secrets. So Abe tells her that he lives in the Fastplex Tower and tells her about the Bobbiedots. She tells him that he has to invite her over to his place, but he says that he will make her dinner for the second date, as the apartment is kind of in shambles right now, but he doesn't tell her that, obviously. He was a bit scared about keeping Sasha safe while she was there, but he was so happy to be with her right now that he brushed past that. We cut to a few days later. Abe drilled a lock into the trapdoor for the Gen 1s to come out of so that Sasha would hopefully be safe while she's there. He makes fettuccine alfredo with shrimp and Caesar salad for dinner, which is like one of the best dinners on this planet, so what a lucky girl she is. And Sasha shows up in a pretty green short dress. So Sasha meets the Bobbiedots and they talk with each other a bit until they give Sasha and Abe some privacy for dinner. The night goes really well. They talk for quite a long time, they kiss, it's great. Abe is a legend. We then cut to a scene of them bowling at Bonnie Bowl, Sasha doing way better than Abe, and they go for a walk and Abe tells Sasha the truth about everything, all about the Gen 1s, the apartment, all of it. She actually takes it pretty well, considering. She actually offers a pretty insightful explanation. What if the Gen 1s weren't actually trying to kill him, but were acting out and were out of control? She compares it to the kids that she works with, how they're all good kids, but sometimes they act out. Sometimes they break things, sometimes they steal things, sometimes they even hurt their caregivers, but it's not because they're bad kids, it's just that they don't know how to deal with the hand that they've been dealt. Maybe it's the same with the Gen 1s. She also suggests looking deeper into Landon, the previous tenant, so he does that the next day. Apparently Landon was suffering from severe paranoia. He believed everyone in the Pizzaplex was trying to persecute him, and he also believed that the animatronics were stalking him and trying to kill him. With what Abe was experiencing now, he felt bad for Landon. He found Landon's contact information and called the number. A woman answered and Abe said he was trying to reach Landon. The woman began to cry and told him that Landon was gone before hanging up the phone. Abe didn't know whether or not she meant gone as in out of town, or missing, or dead. He wrote his mom a letter as he has done before, including in this story, but it just hasn't been important enough for me to bring it up. We cut to Abe and Sasha at Sasha's house, and Sasha tells Abe that she wants to spend the night at his place. This is just slightly misconstrued at first, but she clarifies that she wants to observe the Gen 1s. The padlock Abe set up had been bested by the Gen 1s, and they'd been able to get out, and Sasha wanted to observe them because since she hasn't experienced what he has, she can look at things a bit more objectively than he can. Abe wasn't quite sure about this as he didn't know if it would be safe, but Sasha insisted, and the Bobbiedots were excited that Sasha was staying over. That night at 2:08 a.m. the Gen 1s came out, and Abe used the Mr. Hippo magnet to exit the bedroom. Sasha and Abe observed the Gen 1s for a bit, all three of which were out and about. They noticed two pulled some copper wires out of a socket. Abe didn't know what the wires were doing there, but Sasha whispered to him that she thought maybe they were trying to help him, not hurt him. This whisper, however, was not quiet enough, and the Bobbiedots charged at them. Abe yelled at Sasha to run and headed over to the coffee table, but Sasha didn't move, and the Gen 1s headed toward her. However, when they made it to her, they didn't do anything to her. Instead, they ignored her and headed over to Abe. Abe tried to escape, but the wires ended up knocking over the fridge. Abe was overwhelmed by the Gen 1s, but he felt Sasha's hand grab his. They ran together to the bedroom and shut it, blocking it with his dresser. Abe asked her if she understood what he meant now, but she said that she didn't. She explained that when two unplugged the copper wire, she was actually disarming a trap that would have electrocuted them if they went for the door. She was right. Abe then said that they were trying to get him in the kitchen, but Sasha then said that they seemed more so to be trying to shield him, and that when the fridge fell, 3 was trying to keep it up. The fridge didn't fall, it only tipped over, and the Gen 1s pushed it back up. Abe thought back to the rest of his experiences with the Gen 1s, and he realized that all along, he was right. The Gen 1s weren't setting the traps, they were searching for the traps to get rid of them. Think about it, the Gen 1s had to get rid of the copper trap, but then that means that someone had to have set that trap. It was the Gen 2s all along. But then Abe realized something. The Gen 2s were never truly turned off. They were always awake and always listening. Abe grabbed Sasha's hand and moved the dresser aside, running through the apartment towards the door. Suddenly, all the lights in the apartment shut off, and each of the Bobbiedots appeared on the screen surrounding them, all wearing maniacal grins on their faces. Sasha and Abe ran to the door, but it was locked. They were trapped inside. Inside the apartment, everything was going haywire. The sinks turned on, things went flying, electricity shot, all the while the Bobbiedots were transporting from screen to screen. Sasha told Abe that they had to get up to the Gen 1s to try and get their help. Abe was skeptical, but it couldn't really get any worse than this, so Abe stood on top of a table and Sasha sat on his shoulders. The trapdoor up to the Gen 1s wouldn't move. She said that there might be a mechanism that she could get through, but she needed a flashlight, so Abe went to get her one and also grabbed a knife, but as he did, all the rest of the knives flew out of the drawer. Luckily, they fell to the floor and didn't get back up, but with Sasha on his shoulders, Abe's legs were dying, so to distract himself, he asked why the Bobbiedots were doing this. Rose told him that he never shares food. Gemini says that he doesn't appreciate them. Olive says that he takes them for granted. Abe was about to combat this, but Sasha finally got the trapdoor open and they both went up. They were now in the crawl space along with the Gen 1s. The trapdoor closed, but Abe could still hear the Bobbiedots and the music down there. The Gen 2s began screeching, but Sasha inched closer to them. She calmed them down, explaining that she understood that they were just trying to help. 1 and 2 didn't say anything, but 3 began to speak. She told them that they killed Landon because Landon was going to burn down the Fazplex tower, and allowing him to do that was of course against their programming. Abe then asked why the Gen 2s are trying to kill him, and 3 explains that the Gen 2s are basically Ultron. They're experimental, different from the Gen 1s, and different from the ones in the other apartments in this building. These ones are made to be more confident, which makes them think that they are superior to humans, causing them to want to expunge the humans. They are interested in humans as well, and simultaneously love and hate them. There was one way to destroy the Gen 2s though. Abe had to do a manual system update from the main terminal in the apartment, and then cut the power with the panel in the office, which would destroy the Bobbiedots. Suddenly, a pipe in the crawl space burst, and the drywall and ceiling fell into the apartment below. Abe and Sasha luckily landed on the couch, but the walls were dripping water and the apartment was flooding, and electricity was surging through the apartment, electrifying the entirety of the apartment. The Gen 1s were caught in the electricity and seemed to be in agony. The water level was rising and they needed to get higher so that they wouldn't get electrocuted, so they climbed on top of the nearest partition, despite the face of Gemini being present on the screen of the partition. They made it up, but Abe had to get across to the main terminal, and therefore he had to jump across to the other partitions. But because of the water, it was slippery, and it seemed to be eroding some of the partition and causing it to wobble. Because of this, when Abe is to jump, the partition would fall over and Sasha would fall into the water and die. Therefore, they had to jump together. But when they landed, the partition began to wobble and they had to jump to the next one, and then the next. Sasha was now dangling off the side of this one, but Abe was able to pull her up. Abe turned to the main terminal of the apartment and initiated the system update. The Bobbiedots on the screens began glitching profusely, saying words together that didn't make sense, and body parts swapping spots continuously. Abe still had to cut the power though, but the dining room table flew across the apartment and hit the partition Abe was standing on. Abe and Sasha began to slide down, and they ended up falling in the water, but they didn't die. 3's one eye had turned dark. It seemed that the Gen 1s had fried the whole system. The phone rang and a voice said that they detected a flood from Abe's unit. Abe lied that the bathtub just flooded, and the voice said that they would send someone up in a bit for a cleanup. We cut to 3 months later, where Abe no longer had to hide his tenancy at the Fazplex Tower. Because Abe had solved the issue with the Bobbiedots, Fazbear Entertainment overlooked how Abe had gotten into the apartment in the first place, and also overlooked all the damage and allowed Abe to live there actually legally. Sasha had also moved in with Abe, and they had turned the office into a small bedroom for his mom, who would be moving in with them soon as well. Abe came home with a bunch of robot parts from the sewers. They'd been working on repairing the Bobbiedots, trying to get them functional again, and also repairing their outer shells and parts and eyes. They had also named them after queens. 1 was named Elizabeth, 2 was named Isabella, and 3 was Victoria. And the story kinda just ends right there, with Abe and Sasha excited for Abe's mom to meet the Bobbiedots, and sure that they would like her and that she will like them. But that's all for the summary. I personally really enjoyed this story, but let me know in the comments what you guys thought of it. I will say it's interesting to note that all 3 of the names that they gave to the Gen 1s are names that we've seen before. Isabella is the name of the little girl in Dance With Me who Casey stole the glasses from. Victoria is the name of Steve's robot wife in Help Wanted, and Elizabeth is of course the name of William Afton's daughter. Since the timelines wouldn't match anyway, it's obvious that this is just another case of Scott reusing names, but I do find it a bit peculiar that a Gen 1 Bobbidot in an animatronic with pigtails is named Elizabeth. Does it mean anything? Who knows, but it is kind of something to think about. Hell, if you really think about it, all the Bobbidot's color schemes kind of match that of Circus Baby. 1, which is the one named Elizabeth, is colored blue, which is the color of Baby's eyes before Elizabeth possessed her, while 2, whose color scheme is green, matches the eye color of Baby after she was possessed by Elizabeth, and 3 is red, just like the Baby animatronic, but you'd think that Elizabeth would be the green one since her green eyes are the most defining factor about her, so it's entirely possible that it means absolutely nothing, but I do find it a bit strange that the names were brought up at all, and that Elizabeth was used on a pigtailed animatronic. But that's everything I wanted to talk about for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to. I'll still be doing a summary of the epilogue in this book, the 5th Tales from the Pizzaplex epilogue, so keep an eye out for that, which will probably be coming out tomorrow, and I'll end the video there, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!